Hi, this is Donna. Welcome to DD Paper Crafts. In today's video we're going to be making this Carton Caddy style box, which was inspired by a photo of some takeaway packaging which I saw on Pinterest. The box holds 2 cartons which are 2 inches at the narrowest point, 3 inches at the widest point and 3 inches high. The box opens in the middle like so. The cartons inside are lidded and the lid is optional. You can of course resize the cartons and the caddy, and I will during the video give you the measurements of how I've worked out the size of cardstock needed for a caddy this size. There is space above the lids of the box, so you could add some extras on top depending on the size of the extras, and there is also some space around the outside of the cartons. I will also at the end of the video, if you like the concept of this but you don't want to go to the lengths of making a box, I will give you a quick overview of how you could make a very simple holder. So let me show you how I put a project this size together. We will start with the cartons. You can of course make however many cartons you want for this project, and as we go through the project I am going to give you various ideas about how you could change the look of the overall piece. I'm going to make 2 cartons. And for each carton I have 4 pieces which are 3.5 by 3.5. Along one 3.5 inch side, score at half, rotate 90 degrees and score at 3. Rotate the piece so that the tab is at the top and on the left hand side, and within the top 1/2 inch tab only, score at 1 and 3 inches. Do that on all 4 pieces. Whilst we've got our board out, for the base of the carton you'll need a piece which is 2 by 2. Fold and burnish along the score lines of the side pieces. Take your stylus and ruler. We now want to add a diagonal score line from the bottom of the 1 inch additional score line down to the bottom of the cardstock at the end of the 1/2 inch glue tab. So I'm going to lay my stylus in against the bottom of the additional, butt my ruler up against my stylus, rotate it so that the edge is in line with the bottom of the score line, and then add in a score line. Now we will be cutting away at this right hand section in a diagonal, and if you feel it's going to be easier for you to put a cut line in whilst you've got your ruler and board out, we can follow the exact same process on the right hand side. So put my pencil in at the bottom of the score line, butt my ruler up and put in a pencil cut line. You may feel confident in that you're going to be able to cut away this section when we get to it with your scissors or your trimmer, but if you think the pencil line is going to help you, then that's the way to go. Repeat the score line and or the cut line on all 4 pieces. Take your side pieces. I've got my diagonal score line on the right hand side. Cut down the right hand additional score line to the start of the diagonal. Rotate and remove that bottom rectangle like so. We're now going to cut from the bottom of the 1/2 inch score line here diagonally up to the top right hand corner to create a side glue tab. Rotate and just take a wedge. So our piece looks like this. Move along to the left hand side additional and cut down to the 1/2 inch horizontal. And now if you've got your pencil line in, you can cut away along your pencil line. If not, put the piece in your trimmer or take a long bladed pair of scissors, and I'm going to cut across like so and remove that section. You can now go in and fold and burnish along the diagonal, and just go in and take a wedge from the bottom of the base glue tab. This has created the side of our carton. Repeat that process on all 4 pieces. We can now add our carton together by adding glue to the long side glue tab. Line up the base score line, because we can always trim around the top if we need to. Burnish that down. Repeat that with the remaining pieces. Fold in that left hand side and bring the end over to line that up into place. So that's our carton. Turn it upside down, fold in the bottom glue tabs, take your 2-inch square and add it to the base. And depending on what you're going to put in the carton, you might want to add an additional base onto the inside or an additional base on top of this one. Once that's in place, go in and burnish down the tabs. I do have a little bit of overhang. I can just go in and snip that off from the base. So that's our first carton. So you can repeat that whole process for however many cartons you're going to be making. And for the lid, which is optional, you'll need a piece which is 4 by 4. I have a scrap piece of cardstock which I folded in half, and I'm going to butt the folded edge in against the top left hand side of the scoreboard, so the piece has shifted over slightly. Remove the cardstock and score at 1/2 inch. And repeat that process on all 4 sides. Burnish along all of the score lines. Take your scissors and cut up the first left hand score line up to the horizontal to create a glue tab, and take a wedge, move along to the next score line and repeat. So this is basically going to be an upside down tray. It's a very simple form of lid. Rotate to 180 degrees and repeat at the other end. And again, try to cut away the score lines because it will give a neater finish. And we will add glue to each of these small glue tabs. Fold the piece around and tuck the glue tab under and adhere that into place. Repeat on all 4 corners, and you should find that the lid fits nice and neatly on the top of the carton. So repeat that process for however many cartons you're making. We're now going to make the carton holder, and I will show you the way I make my carton holder, but there are lots of ways that you can adapt this or simplify this, which I'll go through at the end. The first thing we need to establish is the size of the aperture that we're going to cut into the carton. And I have chosen to have my apertures 2 3/4 inches square. And I ascertained this by just taking my ruler, moving my ruler up towards the top of the carton until I got to an aperture size where I felt there would be enough sitting within the holder and enough of the box sitting below the holder. And as a consequence, I got to 2 3/4 inches. So you may prefer a different look. You may want your holder to sit higher, may want less of your box sitting underneath the holder. I'm just going to go through how I came up with the measurements for the piece of cardstock in case you want to resize your cartons or use more cartons, smaller, different sizes, etc. We've ascertained that I'm going to have a 2 3/4 inch aperture for each carton, and between each carton there will be a 1/2 inch gap, and at the end, either side of the carton at the end, there'll be a 3/4 inch gap. This section is 7.5 inches. The 2 3/4 inch aperture comes down approximately 3/4 inch from the top of the box. I could therefore have the sides of the box 3/4 inch. I've chosen to have mine 1.5 inches because that will then give me the opportunity to put some additional items on top of the lids, but still held within the carton. Either side, I'm therefore going to need a piece for the side which is 1.5, and then I want a 1/2 inch flap either end to support the lid. This therefore gives me a piece which is 11.5 inches, so almost the length of a piece of A4 cardstock. Now, I appreciate if you're using US letter size, your length is 11 inches. What you could therefore do is you need to find 1/2 inch, is reduce these two 3/4 inch sizes to 1/2 inch, and that will give you the 1/2 inch you need for the length of cardstock. My understanding is that US letter size is 11 inches. So I'm going to cut my piece down to 11.5 inches. So this is going to give us the length of the cardstock. And then for the width of the cardstock, we're going to need 2 3/4, 3/4 inch either side, plus 1.5 inches for the side of the box. So that's going to give us 7.25 inches. Therefore, for the base portion of the holder, I have a piece which is 11.5 by 7.25. Along the 11.5 inch side, score at 1/2 and at 2. Rotate 180 degrees and score at 1/2 and at 2. Rotate, and on the short side, score at 1.5. Rotate 180 degrees and score at 1.5. And along the short side, within the 1/2 inch tab only, score at 3 5/8 down to the 1/2 inch score line, and do that on both ends. Within this central rectangle here, this is where we're going to add our apertures for our cartons. Now, you may have square dies, or you might be using your craft knife and ruler. I'm going to be using sub-square dies. So the first thing I want to do is work out the placement of the dies. I'm going to start by burnishing along the inner score lines to create the rectangle that the apertures are going to sit in. Fold under the top long tab, place my piece back. You can see that my score line is on the 2 inch mark. Take my ruler and line my ruler up against the 2 3/4 inch mark, and just make a very faint pencil line. So this is just going to give me a guide. You can see I've got a faint pencil line. I'm going to do the same at the other end. So my score line is at 9.5. I'm going to line my ruler up with 8 3/4. Make sure the piece sits in squarely. 8 3/4. That's giving me my 3/4 of an inch from either end. I can then fold under the shortest edge, place the piece in the scoreboard. My score line is lined up with 1.5. I'll line my ruler up with 2 1/4. And again, put a faint pencil mark in. Move along and again line up my ruler with the 5-inch. Make sure it remains butted up and square at all times. So these pencil lines I can just use either end and the top and bottom to help me place my die into the correct position. Now if you're going to be using a cutting knife and ruler, you could keep your piece placed in. You've made your first pencil line at 2 3/4. You would make your next pencil line at 5.5. Run down. You would then move your ruler along to 6 inches and put a pencil line in. That will give you your 2 3/4 inch squares. I've adhered my first die into place. I'm going to run this through my die cutting machine, but one thing to note, with a piece of cardstock this size, you are going to need a larger format die cutting machine to get this through. So if you don't have a larger format die cutting machine, you are going to need to cut this by hand. Here's my piece with the 2 apertures now cut. I can now go in and remove any of the pencil lines which are visible and go ahead and burnish along the score lines again because they may have flattened slightly, and burnish the remaining score lines. So we'll now do our cutting. Start with the piece in a portrait orientation and we're going to work from left to right. Cut up the first score line, past the first horizontal up to the second horizontal, like so. Move along to the next additional score line and cut down to the 1/2 inch score line and move along to the last vertical and cut up through the first horizontal to the second horizontal. So we're splitting the end like so. Rotate, remove the outer rectangle from the bottom square and cut a wedge from the ends, like so. Move along to the final square, rotate, cut away the outside rectangle and take a wedge from the sides, like so. Rotate and repeat at the other end. What will happen is we're going to cut 2 additional flaps for the lid which will be stuck on these sides here. These glue tabs will adhere and come around and be stuck onto the side section like so. And these 2 flaps are going to support the lid but are also going to be a slot system for the lid to fit down into. I'm therefore going to take a very thin wedge from the ends because I want to create a slot for the cardstock to fit down into, like so. And I will recut that if I need to. So we'll now cut the lid pieces and then glue the lid pieces onto the sides before we start constructing this box. For the lid, you'll need 2 pieces which are 7 3/4 by 3 1/8. And along the 3 1/8 inch side, score at 1/2 inch, rotate 180 degrees and score at 1/2 inch. Fold and burnish. On one of the long side glue tabs, take a wedge, and on the opposite side you can either start by leaving it straight or I'm going to round off the corners. So I'm going to use construction glue just to give me some wiggle room. I'm going to lay the tray on top of the lid flap, line that up. Add the other side on. Now we can add glue to our smaller glue tabs on the sides. Pull up the side panel and pull that round. Try to get a nice neat right angle on both ends. Just fold the lids gently backwards, and then you can get in and burnish the tabs down, get those sitting into place. Repeat at the other end. So the lids will then come across, be supported by the flaps, and they will sit in the slots in the middle, like so. The cartons will be sat inside. So this box now is all ready for decoration. What I'm going to do is add some handles onto these long side sections so it's got a more of a carry out look to it. Now, if you don't want to do the wrap that I just showed you, you could, for instance, cut your length of cardstock so that your cartons are enclosed like so. Have a simple hook and loop or a couple of hook and loop dots here, like so. And then with some additional cardstock, you could have a separate handle which is attached to either end, and then the two could meet, and then you would have the handles either side to hold the piece in place. So that just gives you a different idea. I'm now going to go ahead and decorate the tray and the cartons and add on my handles, and then I will come back and go through the final project. Here's the finished box. I've added DSP onto all the sides of the holder. Each handle is made up of 2 strips of 10-inch cardstock added together, and they're 1.5-inch strips wide. So the box opens like so. We've got the decorated cartons on the inside, and I've added a frame around the aperture just to add some additional strength to the aperture, and I've just added some DSP into the base of the box. Overall, I'm really happy with how the caddy has come out. What I am going to do, whilst the lids are sitting in place in the middle, I'm going to stamp and colour an element which I'm going to add to one side on the top of the lid with some hook and loop under the other side, and that's just going to create an additional closure mechanism to make sure that these lids don't spring up. But you can see at the moment they're sitting fine. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing to the channel, and until next time, thanks for watching.